Hey pals, I'm here today to do a standalone book review, which I don't do very often anymore, but this book was my most anticipated release of 2024 and ended up being like my favourite read of 2024. And I will be surprised if anything tops this because this was just such a rollercoaster journey. And as soon as I finished this book, I reread the last 50 pages and I'm already considering rereading it on audio. I finished it, I think, a week ago, and every single day since then, the first thing I thought about when I woke up is these characters and this plot, and they just sort of crop up in my mind throughout the day. So just absolutely loved it and would love to see this author get more recognition for her work. This is her fifth book. It's the fourth I've read by her because her first book is published by Small Press, quite hard to get hold of. I have recently got hold of it, and so we'll be reading it. But yeah, she's not super well known, and that author is Liz Moore. So the premise of this book is that it opens in 1975 in a summer camp in the Adirondacks. One of the camp counsellors wakes up to find out that one of her charges has gone missing. She's not in her bed. And that young girl happens to be 13-year-old Barbara Van Laar. Now, the Van Laar family actually own the summer camp and all of the land around it on this massive preserve, and they have a really big sort of family summer home on the estate. And they're super wealthy and not really well liked in the area. Now, additional suspicion falls on this disappearance because 14 years earlier, their young son Bear also disappeared whilst walking in the surrounding forests and was never found. And again, very suspiciously, the family took hours to call the police when Bear went missing, and then they called off the search quite early. So there's always been suspicions on this family, and they're not well liked in the area because they are very historically wealthy, very stuck up, and they don't really treat all the people they employ from the local town with much respect or regard. And so when their daughter goes missing, there's kind of this uproar in the surrounding community. Now, this book is told from 8 different perspectives, and you have, I think, 7 or 8 timelines. And how it works is that in each chapter, there will be the character name at the top, and all of the timelines that you visit this story in are written, and the one in which you're currently hearing about is in bold. And I think that really works. I read a lot of multiple point of view, multiple timeline novels, and I've never seen this done before, where you get all the timelines written out, but you're one in bold. And I think it does a really good job to constantly remind you of like, oh yeah, I remember what's happening in this part of that story. Like, I know what's happening in July 1975, for example. And I think it constantly grounds you in the surrounding story. So as I said, there's 8 characters that you hear from, but predominantly you're hearing the story from 4 perspectives. One is that young camp counsellor who's in her early 20s. She's called Louise. She is someone from the surrounding community who's had quite a difficult upbringing and comes from quite a poor background. And it's on her watch that Barbara's disappeared. So she is immediately a suspect, and you sort of watch her get really caught up in this web of lies that the people around her tell, and she's a really likeable character. Like, you really want her to sort of survive this horrible situation. So you hear a lot from her perspective. Then you also hear from Tracy's perspective. She is one of the campers who befriended Barbara. So you hear back from the start of the summer once they first met, and then you gradually find out sort of more secrets about Barbara from Tracy's perspective. Then you also hear from Alice's perspective, who is the mother of Bear and Barbara, and she was married into the Van Laar family at a very young age. She was 17 and her husband was significantly older than her, and her story is incredibly tragic. Like, I really felt for Louise and was super worried about her, but Alice's story is just kind of horrific to read. She lives in a situation where she's kind of robbed of any personality or autonomy. She's very scared of her husband, and you get lots of sections in the past from when she first married him and from when her son was born. And for example, her husband won't let her go to him in the night when her son cries out for her. Like, her storyline is incredibly suffocating and oppressive. And I think, like, I never felt like at any point, oh, I don't want to hear from this character, I want to hear from one of the others. But Alice, to me, is the character who I could have read loads more about. Like, I could have had this whole novel just be from Alice's perspective. obviously the novel wouldn't have worked in that sense, but I just thought her story was so complex. And I think also, you know, usually I'm more interested in hearing about people from less privileged backgrounds, which is what you get with a lot of the other characters. But Alice is someone who's grown up in wealth and has married into wealth. But her story is so tragic that you still, even with all this material wealth around her, you still would never want to be in her shoes. Like, she has this horrible life. And then the fourth perspective you hear from a lot is Judy. And Judy is a police investigator. And she is actually based on a group of female police investigators who were promoted in 1975 in New York. They were the first group of female investigators on the police force in the US. And so there's a really interesting perspective within her story, because you see how all the men around her treat her, both her colleagues, who a lot of them treat her with a real disregard, try and send her off to the easy jobs and don't really respect her, and then also a lot of the public. And interestingly, she gets to speak to some people who wouldn't be willing to confide in male detectives. And so she gets to sort of access certain areas and certain people that the others wouldn't be able to. And she is a really interesting perspective to be in. What I think, I mean, this novel does so many things well, but I think the through line that I found that drove all these stories and all these characters, and I think she handled them all with such nuance, even though it was, you know, kind of commenting on the same thing, is this idea of the different privileges and powers that people can have, or the lack thereof of those privileges and powers, and how they can be so insidious, and how certain things like wealth and gender can allow you to manipulate the people around you. And I think in all the stories and all the narratives within this, that was just handled beautifully. On top of that, I haven't even mentioned the setting of this book. Like, the locations in this book are amazing. Obviously, this all takes place within a massive forest, and the summer camp sections in particular, like from Tracy or Louise's perspective, are like amazing. There's this section where the students all get trained throughout the summer in how to survive, and then they get sent out into the woods for a few nights with rations, and they have to just survive with what they have. They have to hunt, they have to trap, they have to cook, they have to set up their bedding. And like, those sections are brilliant. Like, the way she writes about the area is both kind of sinister yet beautiful. Like, you can see the beauty of this natural landscape, but you can also see how many threats it holds. And then the other setting is the Van Laar country house. They come every summer and they throw this summer party and invite lots of rich and famous people to stay with them, none of whom are very nice. And you spend a lot of time within those rooms, especially from Alice's perspective. So you go from this big open space of the summer camp, where you sense a certain freedom but also a certain level of danger, to this really cloistered, claustrophobic, suffocating atmosphere that Alice is living in within the house. And I think they juxtapose really beautifully. I'm gonna finish this video and feel like I've missed saying so much about this book. So what I want to make sure I've said is that I found this book so intensely readable, yet so well written. The characters are all brilliantly developed. Like, I would spend more time with all of them. I thought all the social commentary was done to perfection. I couldn't figure any of it out. Like, I was reading this with a few of my patrons. We have a Discord, and a few of us had this on pre-order, and so we were reading and messaging, and I think I made about 20 guesses about what had happened to Barbara and Bear, and I think pretty much all of them were wrong. And sometimes I'd end a book thinking, well, that's kind of frustrating, like, I feel like I was led astray, and that's just kind of annoying, and yeah, you know, really convenient. I didn't feel that with this at all. I had a couple of like questions I'd quite like to ask Liz more, but like, it all worked. Like, none of the sort of mystery of this book falls apart when you actually examine it, which I think is quite hard to do for such a complicated mystery story. And I just read the last 50 pages of this with my heart in my mouth. I could feel my heart beating really fast, which is pathetic. I was sitting down in bed reading a book, but I like couldn't believe that I was getting the answers, and the answers were as shocking as they were. And yeah, this was just a wild ride. I absolutely loved it. So if you want a book that pairs brilliant writing with an excellent examination of themes and a like wickedly immersive and well-paced plot, then this is definitely the book to pick up. I just loved it, and I would love to hear more people talk about this, and I would love there to be an adaptation, but of course only if it did the book justice, because I just wouldn't want anything about this to be spoiled. So I'd love to know if you've read this book, or if you plan to read it, and if you've read any of Liz Moore's other books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!